Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we are going to talk about constructors for classes in Kotlin. Okay, so let's get started. Now, as usual, before talking about a new concept, I'm going to show you why we need it. Okay, so here in our previous example, we saw how we can create a book based on this class and assign that book a new title. Okay. And that's great. But what if I want this creation of the title to happen along with the creation of the book at the same time? Because sometime in the future, I may forget to set a title for a certain book, and it may be a required field that we need to create this class or object here. Okay? And I can do that using constructors in Kotlin, and I'll show you how. For example, in this class book, by default, you can see that this book doesn't take any parameters. Okay, it doesn't expect any parameters. Well, what if it expects a title? Now, you can write, for example, val title string here in between these two parentheses. And here you can comment out your previous title like that. And now let's just comment out this. We won't need it for now. Let's comment it out here in our code. And pay attention. Now in my book class, I can't create it like that anymore. Because now if I press Ctrl P, it expects a title. Okay? So now I have to provide a title for this book every time I create it. Okay, and I can do something like, for example, my book title. That's how I declare the title for this book at the same time when I'm creating it or instantiating it. Okay, let's run our code because now we have println book.title. Okay, that's our project compiling, and that's it. Now you can see my book title gets printed out to the console because it prints out this title, which I'm providing through the parameter for this book, or what is now called the constructor. Okay, so what are constructors in Kotlin? Based on their name, they're like functions or special functions, if you want, that can help you construct a certain class or object. Okay, and here our constructor was this basically. Class book val title string. Our constructor had one required parameter, and that was our title. Okay. You can also have your constructors variable be mutable with a var keyword like this, var title string, which can let you now use the set new title method. Okay, now you can see that we can use book.set new title, my new title too. Okay, if I try to run my code again, you can see my new title too. Okay, and that's how you basically change the value of a variable sent with the constructor. Okay, now that's great. That's a very important concept in Kotlin and classes in particular. But one small problem we have here is every time we want to create a book now, we have to pass this title and just this title. Well, what if I want to have our book created with a title and an author as well? Right now, we can't do that in the current setup because book only expects a title when it's created. But you can do something here and you can use what's called a secondary constructor. Okay, so this will be our primary constructor, our main constructor for this class. And a secondary constructor is written like this. You use the keyword constructor, and in this constructor, in between these parentheses, you pass two parameters here based on our needs. We pass title, string, and we pass author. also string. And now we can use this notation, the column sign, and after that we write this. Okay, I'll show you what this means step by step after we write this expression. And here we just pass our title. Okay, and at the same time we can do something. Let's open our curly braces. I think this needs to be declared before the constructor for our concept to work. And now, in between these curly braces, I can write this dot author equals author. Okay, that was a lot of syntax to digest, and I'll show you what it does. Okay, this is what's called a secondary constructor. It provides a secondary way for creating your class besides passing just the title, which is a part of the primary constructor of your class or the main constructor. Okay, so this provides another way to create this class using not just a title, but a title and an author as well. Okay, and when you use constructors, you have to reference this when you use a secondary constructor. And what does this mean? This refers to this class. Okay, that's what this keyword means. And this keyword, as you know, expects a single parameter because our class, our primary constructor, expects a title. Okay, so you have to pass your title to this basically. And where are you getting this title? You're getting it from your secondary constructor. Okay, but that's not enough. You're not just changing the title for this book, you want to change the author as well. Okay, and currently your primary constructor doesn't support changing the author of your book. So you have to do that manually. And the way we did that was we had this constructor open curly braces so that we can provide some implementation inside this constructor. And what we did here, we wrote this dot author equals author. What does this mean now? As you know, as I've told you, this keyword refers to this book. As you can see, if I press on my this keyword and I highlight it from here, this is the same as this keyword, which is the same as this class, which is our book. Okay, so I'm referencing the author, which is related to my book class, which is also highlighted here. Okay, I'm changing its variable according to the value that I'm sending here in the constructor. If you press on the author after the equal sign, this author gets highlighted because IntelliJ is trying to show you that this author represents this one, and this author represents this one. Okay, and why do we do that? Because every time now we want to access the value of this author, we can do that directly. And if we changed it using this constructor, it will reflect that change. And I'll show you how. Okay, so now if I want to write, for example, var book2, I can write equals book. And if I open my parentheses, you can notice something. Now I have two different options I can use when I'm trying to create my book. Okay, I can write, for example, book 2 title, the best variables ever on YouTube. Book 2 author. And if I try to print out my book 2 author now, let's comment out our previous code and run our function. We can get book 2 author. Okay, so now when I'm trying to reference book2.author, I'm accessing this one, the one that's of course outside the constructor, because the author, sorry, that's declared inside the scope of the constructor is just exclusive to this constructor. Okay, how we can make use of that? We can assign the author that's present in our class. We can change its value like this according to the value that's coming from the constructor. Okay, and the value that's coming from the constructor is being passed from where you're creating the book, basically, which is in our main method. Okay, so now the author that's passed here in the secondary constructor is this one. And what happens when I see this author inside my constructor, I'm changing the value of the author of my class. Okay, and I told you the reason why we do this is because we don't have access to this author outside the scope of our constructor, which is not what we need. We want to access our author wherever we want in our code. It may be in our main function, it may be in any other function in our application. For example, if I change this author in my constructor to be input author, I would have to change this one to input author as well. But if I try to reference input author outside my constructor, I can't. Okay, because input author in my case was exclusive to my constructor. Okay, so here I write author again. It's generally recommended to use the same name so that you can reference the variable that's for your class with this, because this refers to your class. Dot your variable, okay, in our case the author, and you assign its value based on the one you send with the constructor through the parameter. Okay, now what you saw in this video was a very fundamental concept in OOP, and it's called overloading. Okay, the word overloading comes from overload, which means if you want excessive load or extra load, but in the context of programming, it doesn't necessarily mean excess. Okay, what we did here with overloading was we did some constructor overloading. Okay, because we had a primary constructor and we wanted some extra functionality or some extra roles or logic if you want, which is why we also created a secondary constructor in our case. Okay, that's what's called constructor overloading, and the reason why it's called overloading was because now we can create our book using more than one way. Okay, we overloaded the only way that we can create our book with another way as well. Okay, so we gave our book some kind of extra responsibilities or roles if you want, which would enable us to now have the flexibility when I want to create a book in my main method. If I press on Control P, I can have more than one way to create this book now. Okay, so it's called overloading because you can now create the same book using two different ways. Okay, that was constructor overloading. You also have a concept with method overloading as well. For example, check our set new title here. It expects a parameter, which is of course our input title. Okay. Well, what if I want to overload this function? I can do that, but I have to provide the same name for this function in order for it to be considered an overload. So I can do set new title like that. For example, I can write here title equals default title. Okay. Now in my main method, I can reference either one of these methods. I can write book2 dot set new title, and as you can see, we have two methods for set new title. We have the normal set new title, and we have the set new title which comes with an input title. Okay, so what we did here, as you can see, if you also press Control P, you have two options. You can just pass no parameters, and you can pass an input title as well. That's what's called function overloading. And you need to pay attention because you have to use the same name when overloading your functions, which wasn't a concern with our constructors because we just used the constructor keyword. Okay, so that was our primary constructor. We overloaded it with a secondary constructor. Now we have two separate ways that we can create our book. And we can also provide some extra secondary constructors like this. You can write constructor. You can just have it implement this, which is our class. And you can just pass a default title from secondary constructor. Okay. That way, you used the primary constructor. It required a title. You provided a title like this. But now you can create this book using no parameters at all, thanks to constructor overloading. So now if I try to create a book without any parameters, I can do that. Okay, so let's comment out these. Let's try to print line book2 dot title. Let's run our code. We created our book with no parameters, like this constructor. And as you can see, I get default title from secondary constructor. Because now when I created this book, our compiler checks our class and tries to check an instance of book which can be created without parameters. Okay? It checks our primary constructor. It requires a parameter, a single parameter, which is a title. It checks our secondary constructor here. It requires two parameters, a title and an author. I didn't provide that in my implementation, so it looks for another secondary constructor and it finds this one. Okay? It finds a secondary constructor with no input parameters, which is what we needed here. So now it accesses this constructor, and this constructor sets a default title like that. So now when I try to print out the title of my book, this title gets printed out because it's the one that's being used in my secondary constructor, which I'm using here to create my class. Okay? Now, if you like my content and you find it relatable, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content, and I'll see you in the next video.